the currency in circulation has gone from just over 800 billion to it was as high as 1.3 trillion. They've increased the amount of money out there by over 50%. CMHC themselves says that we have a shortage of 3.5 million housing units currently right now in Canada. We don't have enough. We have a shortage of housing. That shortage is not just a current event. It didn't just happen recently. It's been happening for decades. The government wants to build by 2031, wants to build 3.9 million more housing units. And if you crunch the numbers, it comes out to about 560,000 housing units a year that would need to be built. There's a discrepancy of 300,000 units between what we're capable of building right now and what they want to build. My question is, who's going to build them?
I'm Garrett Wong, and this is the Investing to Win podcast. How do you define success, and what does winning look like for you? Before this episode starts, I have a small favor to ask from you. 88% of the people that watch or listen to this channel did not subscribe. My goal is 50%. So if you've ever liked any of the videos or podcasts we've posted, if you like this channel, can you do me a quick favor and hit the subscribe button? It helps this channel more than you know, and the bigger the channel gets, as you've seen, the bigger the guests get. Thank you, and enjoy this episode. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. I'm excited.
No, glad that we could do this in person. Many of our listeners may know that you're local, so I appreciate you making the trip. We are going to be unpacking from a couple of landlord amateurs here as much as we can, and I will preface this. I'll look directly at the camera when I say this, that anything that's said here is our opinion. It's not, it's just the opinion of a couple of landlords and how the budget may or may not be affecting our real estate industry. Mm-hmm. What I'm referring to, of course, is the federal budget that was just announced a couple of days ago. But before we get into that, I always like to have our guests kind of introduce themselves. And I when in the pre-show, I find your history really interesting. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit. So why don't you start from the beginning? Name, rank, serial number, almost like literally.
Well, geez, where to start? How far back to go? I guess adult life. I joined the reserves 4 days after high school graduation. And it was a summer job, and did that for a few years while I was bouncing around trying to find a career. And where I grew up, central Okanagan, was basically the unemployment rate for 18 to 24-year-olds at the time was about 30% or higher. It was really bad. Basically, finding a job was a full-time job. It took me about 2 months till I landed a job, and it was working at a gas station. Yeah. So it was, so it's different than today. When you got a job, you hung on to it as best you could. But at the time with no university at the time, I couldn't find a career. Nobody was hiring for the trades. You needed to be a journeyman in order for them to bother hiring you, or even looking at you. Let alone a journeyman with several years experience was what they were looking for. So they weren't looking for apprentices. So couldn't do that. And so after 5 years of that, decided, well, I don't mind the military aspect. So I went to the recruiter and said, I think I want to do this full time, and but I want to travel the world. So they said, well, here, join the Navy. I said, no. Thanks. You got any other options? And they said, well, what do you think you want to do? I said, well, I know a guy, he joined, he was a pilot. Could I be a pilot? They said, sure. So they send you off for all the testing and come back. And well, your aptitude scores were great. No problem. The only problem is your eyesight's not good enough to be a pilot. And they said, do you want to be a navigator instead? I said, sure. Just one question. What's a navigator? So I joined and went through all the training and basic training and that for officer, and took that, passed the courses, got signed to squadron, and training. And finally, after about 4 or 5 years of training, I finally got my operational category and started flying, unsupervised to a certain extent. You're always being watched. So that, and made a career of that. Did that for, total time in the military was just shy of 30 years. So, and then when I knew I was going to be getting out of that, during that process, one of the things, to advance as an officer, they want you to have a degree. So, okay, I go back for a degree. But by that time, when I was going for my degree, I had done enough traveling around the world and saw, a lot of places went to, third world countries, very like almost destitute poverty. But I found the people were happier. And so it's always been a hobby of mine to try and, a side master's degree or something like that, or a doctorate, to figure out why. Because everybody seems to think that money will make you happier. There is the saying that money doesn't buy happiness, but look at what the lack of money will get you. It'll buy you a lot of misery. But so you would think that these people who live hand to mouth, I was in countries where they were making less than 50 cents, the equivalent of 50 cents a day, and yet they still seem to be really happy. And so it's like, why? We have so much here in North America, and they have nothing comparatively. The standard of living is so much lower. Why? So it's always been a curiosity of me to try and figure it out. So I went and got a degree in economics, at the time, finance and business, and got that. So for the last 30 years, I've been studying finance, personal finance, and that. And then when I got out of the military, I was backtrack a bit here. I was a flight instructor in the military as well. Got to that. So I like instructing. I like teaching people. I especially like seeing the light bulb moment. If you've ever heard of the light bulb moment, when you're trying to explain something to somebody and all of a sudden you can see in their face that the light bulb came on. And that makes all the work you put in just perfect, all rewarding. So you do that. So I tried figuring out, okay, how can I combine my love of finance, personal finance, and instructing? So I said, well, hey, I'll train to become a financial planner. So I took all the courses of that, and when I was getting out, went and tried working at a bank. That wasn't doing it. So then became a financial advisor with, I won't say the name of the company, but one of the big ones in Winnipeg. And that fell apart after a while. Just they restructured and that. So we parted ways and kind of went, do I try the independent way? And now that I've got a little bit, tried the independent way. That wasn't working either. But one of the things that I had tried doing in order to get clients was I had started doing taxes for them and took all the courses to be a tax preparer, work for H&R Block for a little bit, Liberty Tax. Maybe we might have to edit out those names, but worked with them, and I got the interaction with people. And what that allowed me to do was educate them on their personal finances. And with the financial planning background, you've got all the insurance training and the estate planning, the retirement planning, and all that. And you're able to tell them, kind of show them where they're going wrong in their personal finances and make their life a little happier. And that. So after I stopped being the investment advisor, I still kept getting calls from all my clients. Hey, can you do our taxes? And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but now you're no longer a financial client of mine, so I'm not going to do it for free. So I'll have to charge you. And they were fine with it. And so I started charging, and more people kept coming and more people kept coming. So it's a side hustle that I guess you could call it a side hustle. I only do it for a couple of months, and I kind of focus more on individuals, not big corporations. To do a corporation, I've got some of the training for it, but it's been so long since I've done it that I can just speak in generalities about a corporation and how the taxes are going to affect them. So I'm more focusing, and lately, because I've joined some of the groups with the real estate and become a real estate investor myself, I'm more now just concentrating on helping small landlords with their taxes and helping them through tax planning, a little bit of financial advice and this and that, so that they can maximize their cash flow. Because that is the big problem with a new landlord starting out, is it's always comes down to cash flow.
They're obsessed with it. Well, I'm rightly so, but I mean, I'm not an advocate of cash flow, but we can get into that in another podcast, maybe.
There are pros and cons to it, but
nobody wants to be negative. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, I found that for the most part, the number one problem for them is cash flow, and they're looking for ways of increasing their cash flow. And you ask somebody today, what's your number one expense? And most people will think, well, my mortgage, my food bill. Not too many people get the right answer, and it's the taxes that you pay. If you look at it, the highest tax bracket in Manitoba is just over 50%. And if you add in all the GST and sales taxes that you pay on the products you buy, and your property tax on your house, and blah, 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 and all the extra taxes, a high income earner over 250,000, according to the governments, you could be paying upwards of over almost 65% of your income in taxes. If you can find a way to reduce that bill, it'll free up a lot of money. And that's what I like to do. I look at taxes as being it's a puzzle for me. It's, somebody likes doing the crosswords on a Sunday or a Sudoku puzzle. For me, it looks like I look at your taxes, I look at your tax situation, I look at your financial situation, everything. And I look at, okay, how can I move the pieces around so that you pay less to the government? Legally, of course. It's all above board, and it's all legal. It's just a lot of these techniques have not been presented to people, and and until it's been a process for 12 years of me still going back and every season reviewing the rules and all that. And then with this budget coming out, there's a few changes that are going to affect people.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that in a second. I want to wind it back a little bit. You said that when you went to third world country and you saw people who were basically 50 cents a day happy. Mm-hmm. You said you've been really studying this. Any insights?
We could get into all the things. The economics is a science of human behavior. Essentially, it's the study of human behavior. And so you get, as I've researched more, I found that sociology and psychology really combines in well with an economic background or with an economic study, because it's all, what is the individual on average going to do when they're presented with a particular situation? And from there, you can develop a theory. And I guess if I was to go back, why are these people happy in the third world country? Because they have a social society. The best way to explain it is they have a society, they belong. And I find that the difference between there and here is we've lost some of the practices that bind us as a society, because we get so busy pursuing money, a job, that we forget to do these, or we don't have the time to do these other activities that bring us together and really make a human happy. And so from that perspective, it's how do we change that? I don't know. I don't think one person can change it. I don't think a couple of guys talking about it on a podcast are going to change it.
No, it's not like solving world hunger. But it's interesting. I thought you were going to say it's because they don't know that's all they've known, or maybe it's you're not trying to be like the Joneses. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if
Mm-hmm.
money in a society starts to create that separation, and now you have people who have and the have nots, and now
Mm-hmm.
that creates unhappiness.
Well, there's always a there's that the Aristotle says the disparity between rich and poor, the farther the gap gets, the closer you get to rebellion. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's that unhappiness that's created when the serfs look at the aristocracy and they see that, why can't I get any of that? You don't see that there. It still exists there. They still have, these third world countries. The one that I would go to is we ended up spending 3 days in Islamabad, Pakistan, and I got to tour the city quite a bit, and I actually hired a guide, one of the hotel staff. Hey, take me around, show me around. And he took me to all these introduced me to some of his friends and stuff like that, and took me into one of the mosques and, explained it all to me. And he was quite happy. And I ended up tipping him a little too much. But for me, it was, it was $5, but to him, it was over a week's wages. And, like, what's $5? I dropped $5 on a beer. And but $5 made a difference to him. But it was in that community, you could see how everybody treated everybody else. And everybody knew everybody. They weren't unaware of what was going on outside of, in the Western world, and that they knew what was there. They knew, well, this was 30 years ago. Cell phones weren't as prevalent, but they knew about mobile phones. People had mobile. The rich had mobile phones there. But it was, there was something else that made them happy. And it's hard to put your finger on it, what it is. I still don't know to this date. I've been looking for an answer for 30 years. I haven't found it. I'm getting closer. I think I'm getting closer. And it revolves around society and the sense of belonging and being part of a group. And if you're suffering along with the rest of the group, you tend not to worry about it. But I think a lot of it is coming down to is the idea of keeping up with the Joneses. People look at what somebody else has. They're not happy with what they've got, and they're envious of the other person, of what they have, because I don't have it. And they strive to get it. And it's that pursuit of trying to get something. They might not even need it, and they might not even really want it, but it's that perception that that persona that they're trying to portray to everybody else, that really, when you're in a society, and if your friend accepts you for who you are, you're not trying to look better than you are. You don't need to, because you're accepted the way it is. And I think we've lost that as a society. We've lost that.
I would tend to agree. Again, in the pre-show, we're talking about that sense of community,
Mm-hmm.
equality, working towards a common goal, like, do-it-yourself landlords, right? Mm-hmm. Let's segue into that. You kind of said, "Oh, I invest in real estate," but I also introduced you as a landlord. Tell me about your portfolio.
Well, I'm mostly out of Selkirk. I live Selkirk, north of Winnipeg here, and there's plenty of opportunity there. Yes, once in a while I see something that comes up in Winnipeg, but it's like, I don't want to have to travel. I self-manage my properties, so I don't want to have to travel an hour, 2 hours to go unclog a toilet, for example. And then, especially at 11 o'clock at night, get the phone call, hey, my toilet's backed up and it's the only toilet in the house, so we need it fixed. And it's like, well, last thing I want to be doing. I don't mind, I do mind at 11 o'clock, but I'd rather only have to drive 5 minutes to get to the property versus an hour and a half. So I predominantly am in Selkirk, and what I've gravitated to is just single family dwellings, because it fits my plan is to eventually divulge myself or divest myself of these properties slowly. I'll just make a little quick comment. It's a good thing I did that, because with the changes in the budget, it's going to have less impact on me than it would if I had a larger property. So we'll talk about that later. But so that's what I've done, and what I've ended up doing through different life changes to my life personally, health issues and stuff like that. I've found that I need to become a little more physically active, and so the sedentary jobs, sitting around, talking with clients and stuff like that, was essentially killing me.
Like being a property manager behind a desk all day.
Yeah, and when you're sitting, and sure, sometimes I was sitting for 12, 14 hours a day. Yeah. And of course, when you're entertaining clients, you're consuming stuff that, your diet isn't the healthiest.
Now with remote work, I mean, my office, we're in my boardroom right now, but and I'm only here once or twice a week and only for a couple of hours to meet with clients. Mm-hmm. I've got my butt in a chair, sometimes 12, 14 hours. I forget to get up and my legs are asleep. How good is that, right?
it's not good as you get older. So I found that I needed to be a little bit more active. And what ended up happening with us, how my wife is my partner, and in all our investments. And what ended up happening is we came into a bit of money, and through a sale of some property we had. And well, what are we going to do with it? Well, we maxed out our TFSAs, RSPs are maxed out. What do we do with it? Well, we always talked about investing in, spreading it around into rental property. So we bought a rental property. It was a turnkey, and the experience was pleasant. Everything went kind of as we expected it to, and it's kind of like, well, geez, the easy button, that was easy, and we still had some money left over, and it's kind of, well, let's do a second one. So bought the second one, and it had foundation issues. I bought it knowing I got a good deal on it, knowing that it needed foundation repaired. So I figured, well, I manage people in the military, and I didn't know what they did. They fix planes. I didn't know how to fix the planes. I just managed the people that fix the planes. So how hard can it be to manage people that build houses, fix houses? I kind of figured it was, and really it isn't much difference. The only problem is at the time trying to find them. And we'll talk about this, finding contractors and construction trades as well. That's one of the things there. I couldn't. So I'm kind of sitting there going, I helped my father. He was a general contractor for his own houses and that. And, but back then trades were easier to find. And so he did it. I helped him a little bit, saw the process. And it's kind of like, well, I kind of know how to do it. And, YouTube was coming on. So it's kind of like, well, I can check, and I know other people. So I said, well, how hard could it really be? And you could lose a few $1,000s, but it was a risk I was willing to take. And it was the same time as I was getting out of the investment advising and was looking for something to do, needed to find something a little more physical. So it fit. So I started in this one house. It came with a separate lot attached to it, 2 lots, and it was sitting on the one lot. So I did all the applications, permits, and all that, built the foundation, found a guy to move the house onto the new foundation.
Oh, wow.
And everything went the hell there.
Instead of repairing the foundation, you built a new one and just moved the house.
Yep. And that process went well. So I'm sitting here going, now I've got an empty lot. Well, had an old foundation to be dug out, but it's like, okay, fine. Well, this one went well. And so I looked at the next one, kind of going like, okay. So then I got all the permits, built that one, and
built the house from scratch.
Built the house from scratch, basically. Yeah, did as much of the labor as I could myself. I hire out. I do hire out, casual labor and stuff like that. Or, there are a few things that I don't do. I cannot do flat concrete work, so I have to hire that out. And I can't finish concrete. Even to this day, 10 years of building houses, I still can't do it. But did that. And it just so happened as I was finishing up the second house, lots across the street came up. Talked to the owner, how much you want for them? would you take this? Yeah, okay. So we struck a deal. Now I've got 2 more lots, and it just kept going from there. And so now that's basically what I focus on. Is I build a house a year, build it up, put a tenant in it, go and
you develop or buy and hold.
yeah, and then go to the bank, refinance it, take out what I can. It's getting a little harder now that interest rates are going up,
Sure.
because so I'm having to leave each project, and everybody's probably experiencing this too. I'm having to leave more and more of my own capital in each project, and I'm getting to the point where I'm running out of capital.
Sure.
And so I'm like everybody else, looking for somebody who's got some money that they want to deploy. So that's what I do, and I've been loving it. I've lost 40 pounds since, and that, and just enjoy it. And you asked, and I'll put the point in here. You asked, like, what's my win? What's my definition of win? In this is, it's basically, my definition of success is not stopping work, but enjoy getting up to go to work. So now my definition of success is I get up in the morning eager to go to work because I want to. I love going to work. I love what I do. I don't have to do it though. And that's the big thing is going to work because you want to, not because you have to. And so it's that. So that's I'm living the dream now.
Well, they always say if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work. Or I'm probably butchering that,
Mm-hmm.
but there is something out there.
So it's for me, it's the absolute truth.
No, that's excellent. I find it interesting that, I'm also a buy and hold person. I've done some flips, and I don't know whether it's our climate or I just don't have the patience for it, but I just like that I go into a property. I would love to do what you're doing, building from scratch, because renovating, sometimes fixing old things and making them new again isn't as good as just building from scratch. But nevertheless, having that buy and hold, there's something about it that I like, because it's just this long-term thing. I get to meet the tenants, they're in there, rather than this very quick, fleeting transaction. Why did you, have you flipped anything or ever built for the purpose of selling, like a house developer, I guess?
No, I've never. Well, it's crossed my mind, and I do have one unit right now that I'm working on to sell off, but I had bought it 5 years ago now, with the intention. It came with a couple of extra lots, and at the time I was needing lots to build on, because I was expecting that I'm going to continue doing my build, buy, and hold, or buy, build, and hold process indefinitely. So I needed lots. And so these lots came up, the house was on it. It just so happens at the same time, another set of lots came up, and I'm kind of going like, hey, the price is so good, I can't say no to it. So I bought these lots, the two. This one, the first one, had the house on it. So I put tenants in it, and they were paying the bills. I wasn't making anything off of it, but I wasn't paying anything. So it's like, okay, well, that can sit indefinitely. These other lots that I bought, they're not making me any money, and they're costing me, whatever capital I put into it. It was an opportunity cost. So it's like, okay, I got to work on these ones first. And so this first one sat there. It was an older house. I was slated, I was going to demolish it and build on the 3 lots. And it turns out that tenants have stayed in it so long, and the market has gone up so much that the house is worth too much to demolish now. Crunching the numbers, if I fix it up and sell it, I can make more of a profit than building and holding and putting a tenant in. If I look at it from a 5 to 10 year period, longer term, I'd probably make more. But the idea is, you got to keep your money cycling a little bit, and because you've always got to keep your options open. And that's part of my philosophy when I coach people, or if I talk with them, is when you're making decisions, financial decisions, you want to keep as many options open as you can. And like the old saying, when you close a door, window opens. Well, you want to be able to close the door and have 2 windows open, and you don't want to make a choice where you close a door and nothing opens, to use the analogy. And so from this, for my personal situation, doing this gives me more options than if I was to demolish it now and build another house on it.
Well, you went into it with 2 different exits.
Mhm.
I mean, nothing wrong with that. It's
Yeah.
very smart.
Yeah. So that's going from that. So that's the only one that'll be the first one in 10 years.
Well, congratulations on building up a portfolio. Already learned tons just from talking to you. Let's transition into the B word, the budget.
Oh,
So we talked about this in pre-show. So what I did, audience, was I actually found the budget document and I actually fed it into ChatGPT. And then I said, ChatGPT, in my prompt, analyze this for me and tell me how this is going to look with respect to rental property owners. Okay. Now, I'm just going to read out the titles that came out here, not the smaller details. So it said, okay, it introduces several measures that will impact rental property owners in Canada. Here's a summary: increased housing supply, tax changes, zoning and regulatory reforms, tenant credit for rental payments, support for first-time home buyers, flood insurance and anti-fraud measures, infrastructure and community investments, long-term market trends, economic growth and inflation control, and energy efficiency and upgrades. I don't know if that's everything, because certainly what I've seen in the news would prompted me to reach out to you based on some of the responses that we're seeing on social media. I thought it'd be really good to have a couple of landlords, again, qualifying that this is not tax advice, looking at the camera, just to, how is this affecting the everyday Canadian landlord? Where do you want to start? What's the first thing that came out or thought in your head when you started reading or hearing about the budget?
Honestly, and not want to go down the political road, and say anything bad, negative about any particular government or that. But honestly, I don't think this is going to solve the problem that they're trying to solve.
What are they trying to solve? Let's identify that.
Well, they're trying to solve a shortage of housing. Right now, my opinion, we have a housing supply problem. It's created by an increase in demand. Simple economics 101, you increase demand without a subsequent or a corresponding increase in supply, and you're going to end up with disequilibrium if we want to.
Did you just not say that we have a supply like an excess, or you're saying we have a supply problem, meaning we don't have enough?
We don't have enough. Okay. We have a shortage of housing.
Okay.
That shortage is not just a current event. It didn't just happen recently. It's been happening for decades. In my opinion, it's been happening. Some of it can be, I believe some of it can be attributed to, like when I came of age, graduated high school and I did try to get into the trades. I had applied for a couple of apprenticeships, didn't get them, or couldn't find anybody who basically you're saying, hey, I'll even work for free. I'm living with my parents. I'll work for free. Just give me a chance to show you what I'm worth. And it didn't happen because there just wasn't a demand at the time. Now with population growth, we can look at the demographics and the reason why we've got such a large cohort of people wanting to purchase houses, wanting housing through immigration, actual population growth and whatnot, or natural population growth from just kids being born in Canada, and now they're of age where we've got the baby boom echo. The baby boomers were our grandparents and whatnot, my grandparents, and now that they've gone, their children, 30s, 25 to 30 to 40-year-olds now, the baby boom echo, they're coming in. They're a large cohort of the population, but 25 to 40-year-old, that's typically when you buy your first house.
Sure.
You get married, you have kids, you need a house, you want a house to live in. So that's creating the demand. Immigration creating the demand. But what happened started towards the end of the 80s, early 90s, as I was in my 20s. It was kind of being poo-pooed that you don't want to go into the trades, you don't want to go into blue collar work because that's low.
I still to this day, I mean, hope my mom's not listening to this podcast. Mom, I apologize, but no, in all seriousness, she always used to use the term blue collar, white collar, and I mean, you grow up with it. I think our own generation, we're almost relatively the same age, and right now it just seems so offensive to say blue collar. Right?
Yeah. My parents were the same. They said go to university. They were so disappointed when I dropped out of university the first time. They were very happy when I finally did get my degree. But at the time, it was get a degree, get a good job, get a white collar job, and
work in an office.
My father basically told me, he says, get a degree, and then if you want to go work as a trade, go ahead, because then you'll have the degree to fall back on. That was his exact words. Not saying, but that was kind of what he was taught as he was growing up. So but that was the prevalent attitude amongst the population a lot. But the thing is, though, is what ended up happening. We'll cut to the chase. What ended up happening is there became a shortage of skilled tradesmen. And so, and if you go back, and even CMHC, government agency, if you go back and check the government, you don't have to trust me on these numbers, but we've been running a shortage of housing builds and all types, single family, apartment buildings, condos, every type of building, of about 50,000 units a year since back to the 2000s.
Wow.
And it's just cumulative, and it keeps building on it. And, when it first comes out, 50,000 short, and it wasn't 50,000, it starts off at zero and slowly builds. But since about 2002, 2004 area, we've been running about a shortage of about 50,000. We should have been building 50,000 more houses a year. Now, what's happened over 20 years is that 50,000 has grown with population growth and with immigration and just more people coming in. CMHC themselves says that we have a shortage of 3.5 million housing units currently right now in Canada. The budget came out, and the government wants to build by 2031, wants to build 3.9 million more housing units between now and then. And if you crunch the numbers, it comes out to about 560,000 housing units a year that would need to be built to reach that goal by 2031. The thing is, though, is the latest statistics from CMHC is we aren't even building 275. And the government, with their own measures from this budget, wants to build 570,000 a year. They want to more than double it.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a discrepancy of 300,000 units between what we're capable of building right now and what they want to build. My question is, who's going to build them?
Right.
Who's going to swing the hammer? Who's going to be the electrician?
Money, you still can't.
Yeah.
Those are skilled trades.
You can say all you want as a politician, say we're going to do this, but when the rubber meets the road, my question is, who's going to do this? There's nobody to do it. We can barely.
Well, that lag effect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like healthcare. Not that I'm going into healthcare. Mm-hmm. My wife's a nurse, but it's the same thing. Oh, we're a shortage of healthcare. Great, just get more doctors, more nurses. Well, the lag time.
Yep.
Even if you just say, "Hey, you don't even need a high school degree," I'm just going to put that out there or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's still going to take 3 or 4 years for that to happen. What do you do now? Mm-hmm. It's not going to satisfy that, and a trade is at least 2 to 3 years plus apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. I mean, this current government and their budget's going to be gone before they even are capable of doing that for 4 million houses.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the breakdown of your viewers are, but I imagine there's quite a few out there that are landlords and
Absolutely.
flippers,
I would
and
say,
they they construct. I talk to the contractors, the plumbers, the electricians that I deal with, and any of them would gladly they would gladly take on more workers right now, more employees right now, but they obviously want somebody who's going to show up, and that's the big thing, but they would gladly, because they've got the business. The thing is, though, is they can't find the personnel, and that they would gladly train them, here. I know a couple of guys that would gladly take somebody on, train them, give them an apprenticeship. They definitely want them to vet them a little bit and make sure, okay, you're actually going to show up in that. But they've got the work. Their people are calling them saying, hey, and they're having to turn down work because they just don't have the employees. And that's the same. All that's going to happen with, we now want to build 570,000 a year. The demand's going to increase. The demand is already there. It's just we can't satisfy it.
Well, I just have a thought in my head, being a property management professional. I go to conferences all the time in the U.S., and the two biggest components they have, they're obviously trying to find qualified staff. The other component, especially in some of the Western states, they can't get a contractor, period. We're quite fortunate here. I find anyways, at least with my list of contacts, that I can make phone calls and get people to repair our properties. What's going to happen if and when a contractor who specializes in repairs is all of a sudden, maybe, I don't know how the government is going to build all of these houses, even if they throw a pile of money at it, other than incentivizing somehow. So I believe with the current contractors, let's say that you lose 40% of your repair type contractors to do new houses. That's a completely different facet, right? What are the other people who have existing housing stock, homeowners, landlords, property managers? Now there's going to be another hole here. You're just basically moving around a cohort, to your point. How do you fill that void? It takes years.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that point you said there, that they're just going to steal from one, rob Peter to pay Paul kind of sense of thing.
And now there's going to be, the shortage for us.
Yeah, it definitely is food for thought. Getting back to the budget, though, I don't see anything in here. It to me, it's a lot of it's a lot of wishful thinking. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Their heart is in the right place, but they haven't come up with a plan.
Right.
Okay, how are we going to implement this? How are we going to make this happen? Just throwing money, like you said, just throwing money at it isn't going to do it. There were a few things in here where they are, providing funds for housing. One of the ones is, and they increased the funding for it up to $55 billion. It was one of the ones, but they're wanting to increase, or they're increasing the funding up to $55 billion. They made the announcement that they topped it up by $15 billion to defray some of the costs, or to provide low cost mortgages, loans for developers to build buildings. But they have to be, number one, they have to be apartment buildings. I think it's bigger than 5 units. But also a majority of them have to be priced at such that the overall rent, average rent of the units does not exceed 30%. I think the number is 30% of the average income in the area that the unit is in. And it's like, well,
how can you even predict that?
Good question. And if you look at the numbers in Manitoba, the average income for a renter, and StatsCan does break this down if you go and you look for it. The average renter, I don't have the exact numbers, so don't phone me up and say, hey, you got the number wrong. But it just compares it. The average income in Manitoba is around $95,000. but the average income for a renter is down around 45,000. It's less than half. So if you take 30% of 45,000, you're looking
grand in rents.
Yeah. So basically that comes out to, that's the number I came up with, was $1,100 as well, to be able to buy or to be able to rent an apartment. So these new units,
which are brand new, which cost today's construction costs. It's not $100 a square foot.
Nope. You're going to need to ask. And the average unit in Manitoba is a 2-bedroom unit. 2-bedroom plus.
Okay. And what does CMHC say that the average I mean, I should know this, but I mean, it's not $1,100.
Well, if you just look, and your viewers could say, it's upwards of 1,500-1,600.
Yeah.
So, and
there's a gap.
So the thing is, though, and I don't think getting a little bit of low cost interest loans, it would have to be a 0 interest loan.
I don't even know
close
to
to
do it. I mean, think about this for a second. From a business point of view,
mm-hmm.
Let's say that I'm a developer. I'm into building apartment blocks.
Mm-hmm.
I have to make a financial decision for myself and my capital investors
mm-hmm.
to build said apartment block. If I have a cap on the rent
mm-hmm.
for however many years, and I know that the MLI Select program has, I think, at the time of this recording, that $1,100 price point. I think it's 10 years that you have to be locked in. Mm-hmm. I personally don't like that 1,100, because what happens in 5 years, if now the market's 13, now you're choking yourself off.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing, deciding not just to renovate something. Now you're deciding to buy a plot of land, put millions and millions of dollars into an apartment start, mm-hmm. to have it capped because the neighborhood or that city or that whatever mm-hmm. is 33% of the average income. You can't even mm-hmm. predict it.
Mm-hmm. And further to that point is, you're also at the vagaries of what the interest rate of what the market interest rates are going to be. And if you look at, just a little bit of a sideline note here, Trudeau, since the Liberals have been in power, has doubled the national debt from about 600 billion to 1.2 trillion. And with this latest budget, they're not stopping. They're not slowing down. And how they're financing these deficits is concerning to me, because they're not just going out to the market and borrowing the money. If they were to do that, go out to the market and borrow, you buy a government bond, $1,000, that's $1,000 not in your pocket that you can't go out and spend elsewhere. So it basically takes that money out of the economy, and the economy slows down. What they're doing instead is they're going to the Bank of Canada, and the Bank of Canada is printing the money. We talked about this offline. Since January 2020, the currency in circulation has gone from just over 800 billion to it was as high as 1.3 trillion. It's now come back down a little bit to 1.2 trillion, but they've increased the amount of money out there by over 50%. And there has been no corresponding increase in goods that have been produced. So nobody should be surprised why we've got inflation. And the thing is, though, is this $40 billion deficit from this latest budget, and with no end in sight for when they're going to balance the budget, we're just going to see, and that's how they're financing it, is it's going to be printed, because nobody's investing, because they're all expecting interest rates to go up. Nobody's going to invest at 5% today if they think interest rates are going to be 8% next year. And so the government is going to have to print this, and this printing is just going to create more inflation. And so now we're going to have to, the market thought out there is that interest rates are going to decrease somewhat in the next couple of years. After this budget, I'm very skeptical that they're going to decrease at all. I don't think we might see a little bit of a decrease, but I don't think we're going to see anything in the way of interest rates. And once the inflation from these latest spending gets into the system, it usually takes 18 to 24 months for it to get into the system. we're going to see inflation go up, and they're going to want to combat it, and they're going to drive interest rates up again. And so now this $1,100 unit that you need to rent at is going to be costing you even more in interest.
So again, let's talk about the law of unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, if that developer is a good business person, they're not buying that deal. They're not going into it. They're not building it.
No.
So now there's another 50-unit apartment block that's not being built.
Well, they won't be using this money that's being set aside for this is not going to be an incentive for the developer. They're going to go, and I'm going to build a unit or a building where I can rent the units out at $1,600, and I can increase the rent every year as to what I need it. And that's what's going to happen. So that's what I mean is a lot of these things that they came out with in the budget.
Yeah, it doesn't have real world out.
They're portrayed as being, incentives, but they're not going to have the intended effect.
Let's talk about tax. The T word, you already did the B word of the budget. There's a lot of scary things, capital gains, increasing this and that. Can you, in your interpretation of it, break down, let's start with what capital gains tax is, and then we'll talk about what it currently is right now and what they've increased the tax rate to.
Well, there's three types of income that anybody can make. First off is employment income. You go and you work for an employer and he gives you a paycheck and you get a T4 slip at the end of the year. That's employment income. It's taxed at, and they're graduated, but it's predominantly taxed at the highest rate. Next comes dividend income. You own shares in a company or you own the company yourself, and instead of paying yourself a salary, or if you're the investor, you own the shares, you get paid a dividend. You get paid a share of the after-tax profits of the company.
So a company, corporation has already paid tax once at the corporate rate, whatever that may be. Mm-hmm. Now you're paying a second rate of dividend.
Yep.
But arguably it should be less than if you were taking the money out personally.
Well, the amount of money that, or the amount of tax that you pay as the dividend as the receiver of the dividend, is less than if you had received it as employment income.
Right.
However, usually on average, in general, the amount of tax that's paid on the profit that the company has to pay and then you have to pay on the dividend is about the same as employment income.
Sure. Okay.
It's about the same amount. It's just
so they get their share regardless.
It's just you don't have to pay it. Oh yeah. No, the government is not gonna give up a chance to take money from you. And then the third one is a capital gain. And capital gains for the longest time were never taxed. You could sell an item, you could sell a share in a company, and if you made a capital gain profit on it, you didn't have to pay any tax on it. It was, here you go. But then in their need for more money, they started taxing it. The reason why they don't tax it at the same rate as they do dividends or income. Right now, capital gains are taxed at half the employment rate. So essentially, and the way they do it is they say, okay, you make $1,000. Okay, take 500 of that, set that aside. You don't have to pay any tax on it. That's yours. Keep it. The other $500, you have to take it in as if it was just employment income, and you pay the taxes on it. So it adds onto whatever you were making as a salaried employee, and you pay tax on it. And it might put you up into the next tax bracket. So you pay it at your marginal rate. The reason why they came out and they said, we're going to tax it at a different rate is they acknowledged that the government creates some inflation. And capital gains, a lot of the capital gains, especially if you look at a house today, like what changed in the last 5 years to make a house, a $250,000 house, $300,000? That $50,000 is treated as a capital gain. But what happened in the last 5 years? Mostly inflation.
Well, unless you've improved the house, but then it'd be more than 50.
But if you did nothing to it, it
would still increase by 50.
You would have it, and that would be considered to be a capital gain. So the government, when they started charging tax on capital gains, they acknowledged that a portion of the gain was due to inflation, which was their doing. So they said, okay, we'll give you a break because we want you to keep the value, as much of the value of the increase as you can. Because if they taxed it at the full rate, that $50,000, a lot of that is because of inflation. And this hypothetical 50,000, a lot of it is because of inflation. That $50,000 today won't buy you as much as it would have 5 years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So that was the whole idea behind why there was a different tax rate for capital gains. Now what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, we're going to increase the amount because they want everybody to pay their fair share.
So what is the current capital gains tax rate?
Well, it's works as an inclusion rate. So right now they want you to include 50% of the capital gain into your income. And then you get taxed at your marginal rate, which is dependent on your total amount of income.
So let's break this down for myself, but I'm going to say for my listeners as well. Maybe they're understanding it more than I can. If I have a house that I bought for $100,000, and let's pretend that I haven't fixed it up because I don't want to muddy the waters with expenses and write-offs.
Yep.
And it is just for easy math. I sell it for $200,000, so I have a $100,000 gain. What am I being taxed on out of that $100,000?
Okay, that $100,000, what they say when we do the taxes is we take half of it, and just
so half the gain.
Half the gain. You don't have to pay any tax on it. Put it in your pocket. Go have fun with it.
So I have 50 grand out of my 100 profit.
Yep.
Great. That's in my bank. The other 50 I'm getting taxed on.
Yeah, you on your tax return, we included it along with any other income you've made. So say you are an employee and you're making $75,000. Now that $50,000 comes in and you are going to get taxed on $125,000.
Okay.
And depending
my personal tax rate.
At your personal tax rates, but we have a graduated tax scale that the more you make, when it bumps you up into a higher tax bracket, you pay tax on that higher amount or that portion at a higher rate, not the whole thing.
Yeah, you don't get bumped into a higher tax bracket from 25 to 49 and now all of a sudden your entire income is just that portion that's over and above that bracket.
In Manitoba, and I don't know the exact number, but basically for the first $40,000 of taxable income, you're paying at about 25.8%. 15% federal, 10.8% provincial. Okay, you go above 40,000 and it's around 60,000. Again, don't quote me on the numbers. These are just generalities for the sake of the argument. So from 40 to 60, the federal tax rate goes up to 20.2. I think I'm trying to remember, but the provincial tax rate stays the same until 60,000, but then goes up to 12.5% after that, up to 80,000. And so, but between 40 and 60,000, you're paying the equivalent of about 33% on that amount that's above 40,000. And each time you hit one of these thresholds, the tax on that portion is more than. So, and they call it the marginal tax rate. And basically the way to think about it is if you were to earn one more dollar, how much tax would you have to pay on that one more dollar? The highest tax rate in Manitoba is around 52%, and that's above 250,000. So if you earn $250,000 and $1, that $1 extra, you would be paying about 52%, 52 cents of tax.
Would be the slightly lower bracket. Yeah. See, maybe I've been misunderstanding this all these years because I always sort of calculated in my head that it's about 50% on half the gain, which is about $25,000 of cap. Like that's kind of what I programmed in my brain.
It all depends on how much other money you've made. And we've been discussing on the social on the social media platforms, and I've been kind of voicing my opinion because it's tax time and all that. A lot of people have been saying that they don't want to claim depreciation expense because, well, then I'll just have to pay it later. The whole thing behind taxes is you can't get away from paying the taxes, but what you can do is you can choose when to pay them. And depreciation expense is a very useful tool to help you decide when you want to pay the tax. Because you can, with depreciation, you can defer the tax. Say you make $10,000 of net income on your rental property. I'm just throwing a number out here. Ease of numbers. If you're able to depreciate and use depreciation expense to get that down to zero, if the $10,000 was all the income you had that year, then you would be paying 25, let's call it 25%. It's a little bit more, but 25%. So you'd be paying $2,500 tax on that $10,000. Now, if you use depreciation expense to get it down to net zero, you still got the $10,000 in your pocket. Depreciation expense is just an accountant's term that the government allows you to factor in the fact that the building is slowly wearing out. You're going to have to replace it. You're going to have to do the shingles. You're going to have to do the siding, and all that. But if I bring my profit on my paper, on my taxes, down to zero, I don't have to pay that $2,500. Later on, when I sell it, I'm going to have to do all the calculations and find out, did the property actually depreciate? Did the house on the property actually, is it worth less? Did I depreciation expense is an estimation. I'm estimating this is how much value of the house is going to decrease. What usually ends up happening is the house doesn't decrease at all. It actually, despite the fact you do nothing to the house, it's still going to be worth more in 10 years than it is today, despite the fact you did nothing. And it did wear out, but it's still worth more than so the thing is, they're going to want you, okay, this expense that you estimated, well, you estimated wrong. We want it back. But you don't have to pay it back until you sell the property. So if you never sell the property, you never have to pay the tax owing on that $10,000. So the question.
Let me back up a second, just so I can. I'm really about trying to clarify this.
$100,000
rental property.
Yep.
Depreciating. Let's say I'm depreciating. I'm going to say 10% because it's a standard thing. I'm going to depreciate it by 10%. So that means now that I've written off 10%, the property is quote unquote worth, and stop me if I'm incorrect, but it's now worth $90,000 on book value.
On book value, yes.
Book
okay.
value, okay. And if I go ahead and next year I sell it for exactly what I paid for it, because I've depreciated, there's a gain of $10,000. Is that accurate?
There's a book gain.
Okay.
Because you still paid $100,000 for it.
Right, but now I have a gain of $10,000. Do I not?
You have what's called a depreciation gain.
Okay.
Semantics, yes, but it depends because that gain that you think you have because you depreciated, it went and it lowered your income. It didn't lower any gains you had.
Sure.
So it lowered your income in a particular year. So now what you have to do is you have to take it and you have to put it back in as income in the year you sell. It doesn't count as a gain.
Okay.
So in effect, you actually earned zero capital gain. But what you've got is what's called a recapture. You recaptured that write-off because you estimated wrong. The house didn't actually depreciate, and so now they want you to recalculate it back at what it actually.
But you get to choose when you're going to do that,
and you choose that by choosing when you sell the house or when you sell the property.
And you don't want to be selling these properties when you're at your maximum earning potential. Let's say, if that's a strategy.
You can time it. You can choose, and that's the whole thing. You can choose when. So you can, if you're working a job where you're making $75,000 and you're looking at the profit of $100,000 on the house, like we used the example a couple of minutes back, the $100,000. Well, why don't you wait to sell the house when you stop working? You're not making the $75,000, so now you're not bumped up to $125,000 and having to pay tax on the extra $50,000 at a higher rate. You wait, you're not making that $75,000, and now your income for the year is only $50,000.
So it's not dissimilar to the RSP strategy.
Yes.
Okay. I like that. Okay.
Yep. But it gives you, the taxpayer, it gives you options. And we were talking offline and before there, the whole idea when I help somebody with their taxes and help somebody with their finances is I want to keep as many options, as many doors available, choices available to the taxpayer down the road as they have today. And unfortunately, too many people make choices and they don't think down the road, and they unknowingly shut a lot of those doors or block a lot of those options off to themselves, and then they don't have the choices when they go down the road. My philosophy when I help a client is I want to keep as many of those options on the table for them down the road as possible. And through tax strategies and just moving stuff around, saving yourself the money. I know you say you don't like, you're not a big fan of maximizing cash flow today, but there are a lot of landlords out there that they need to maximize their cash flow.
So just to qualify what I said,
Mhm.
when I said I'm not a big fan, what I meant was I'm not a big fan of having the absence or presence of cash flow
Mhm.
driving your decision of whether the property is successful or not. That's really what I meant.
Okay.
By that.
No,
Because
but-
so too many people come to me and they're like, Garrett, my property is terrible. I'm going to sell it. Okay, well, what's wrong? Well, my cash flow went from 200 down to 50. Okay, well, how much did the property increase last year?
Mhm.
Well, my $300,000 property is 350. Okay, so technically you made 50,000 if you were to sell it.
Mhm.
Forget about the taxes.
Mhm.
How much did your tenant pay down your mortgage last year? Well, my principal went down by 10 grand. Okay, so yes, your cash flow was down by about 2 grand a year, but you still made, quote unquote,
Mhm.
30 grand
Mhm.
on the property. That's kind of what I'm trying, the point I try to make to some of my
Yep.
clients.
Yeah. No, and those are valid points, but you also have to look at as well. You also have to look at the overall picture. Is if they're making $50 a month versus $150, they're making $100 less. What's their overall return on the investment? Because if they do crunch all the numbers and come up with, well, I'm making 7%, respectable return. Uh, for some people will go for more. I personally try for a little higher, but they have to look at it and go like, okay, what could I get a better return somewhere else?
Right.
And then that might be the motivating factor. Yes, okay, it's time to sell this, but then they also have to look at all the other things. Okay, what's my tax hit going to be? Because you have to look at after tax. And we're talking. The budget came out with this new thing of we've got to. Or they're going to increase the capital gains inclusion rate, which will actually increase the amount of tax you have to pay on your capital gains if they're a certain size or bigger. But you have to look at your after tax. How much money am I going to be left with after tax if I sell this property and go into another one? And if my after tax, if I'm taking such a hit because I'm making so much more money somewhere else and it's a severe tax hit, I might want to wait a year. I might want to accept the fact that, yeah, I'm only making 6% when my goal is 7%. Because if I sell this property, it's going to deplete the cash, or it's going to reduce the amount of cash I have left over such that my return is actually only going to be 4%. There's a whole...
Yeah, I mean, just getting back about 10, 15 minutes ago when we were talking about supply and demand, again, if you statistically go before this budgetary change, and there was a certain amount of properties being sold by a certain people of income through strategy every year, and that number is consistent. Now, because capital gains has increased for that bracket, we'll talk about that in a second, these people are now holding on to their properties. Now there's going to also be a downward spike in available housing because these people are presumably disposing of these assets. They're bought by first-time home buyers or whatnot. So now you have another artificial choke of the supply, which is going to increase demand, which again, we
talk about all those side
Well, it's not going to increase demand. It's going to just increase the gap between supply and demand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what has according to the budget, what has the capital gains rate? What are they proposing?
Well, what they're proposing now is that for any, and this is just for individuals, private,
Yes.
not corporations. They've said that, okay, we're going to let you keep the 50% inclusion rate for the first $250,000 in capital gains. So you sell the hypothetical house and you make $100,000 profit off of it or capital gain off of it. It's not going to affect you. You sell the apartment block and you make $750,000 off of it. The first $250,000, they'll let you keep the 50% inclusion. Anything above the $250,000 is subject to 66%, 2/3.
Okay.
So now instead of just bringing in half, so of that first 250,000, you bring 125,000 into your income, and then of the other 500,000, you have to bring in quick math here, 2/3 of it, so 300,000, so 200,000 versus 150 if it was under the old rule. So you're now being taxed on 50,000 in this situation.
Okay.
You're now being taxed on $50,000 more.
Now, is that then asset by asset?
No,
Or
it's
is that
cumulative per year.
Okay.
So you sell one house a year, and it resets. You get a fresh start at the 250,000. But if you want to dispose of an entire portfolio of several houses, several
Sure.
apartment blocks,
Can happen.
which could happen in an estate.
Yes.
Somebody dies, and it will, because even if it's transferred to heirs, it's still deemed as though it's sold.
Yeah.
So you've got potential a parent or something, or a grandparent that has held on to and is looking at a $5 or better $1 million capital gain on their assets. You first 250,000 is taxed at 50% inclusion. The other 4,750,000 is taxed at, is included at 66%. So you're potentially looking at a 30%, almost a 30% increase in the amount of tax that you have to pay.
So let's break this down then, because again, looking at the camera, not a tax opinion. No, in all seriousness though, because we talked about this a little bit in pre-show. The government's doing this obviously to get more money, and no matter what the media says, and some are saying, oh, capital gains, look at this, and then the others are going to say, well, it's only for people who are doing this. I look at that almost as unintended consequences, or maybe accidentally on purpose, to try to prevent people from maybe, let's say, becoming house flippers, right? Because you're flipping 5-6 properties a year, this new rule will affect you.
Well, they already had a rule that came out last year's budget.
Exactly. Yeah.
that dealt with this, with people who make a business of flipping houses, and you have to own a house for 365 days before you sell it. Otherwise, if you sell it before the 365 days, it's all business income. There's no capital gain.
Okay.
So, and then afterwards, the 360, that doesn't mean that if you are a house flipper and you do this for a living, that, I just have to hold it for 365 days. And then I can count it as capital gain. No, because Revenue Canada will look at it and say, no, this is your business. You're doing this with the intention, you're buying it with the intention of fixing it up and flipping it. That's a business. So even if you hold it for 366 days or longer, they still might come in, and they probably will come in and say, no, this is a business activity. You have to count that all as business income. None of it's capital gains. So
now you get into the semantics of incorporating and having a corporate tax rate, but then it's
whether it's a business activity or a capital gain is inconsequential of whether you're operating as a corporation or as a sole proprietor, as an individual.
I just meant that there's a different tax rate for corporations.
There is, however, however, this activity would still, if it's in a corporation, would still count as business activity. The amount of money that you're left with in your pocket at the end of the day is going to be the same, whether you do it as a corporation, whether you do it as an individual. So there aren't where it might become advantageous to do that is if you own the property in the corporation and sell it with the intention of buying another property.
Okay.
Because then if you were to do it as an individual, sell a property, you would have to pay capital gains at your marginal rate, which could be 50%. If it's in the corporation, and this is not tax advice, it depends on the situation, you would only pay 9.5% is the small business tax rate. And there's depending on how much the business makes and whether it qualifies. So now instead of paying potentially 50% because that's your marginal tax rate, you pay 10%. Let's call it 10%. So now you're left with more money that you didn't pay in tax so that you can go out and buy the next building.
Right.
But if you leave that money in the corporation and don't do anything with it, just invest it passively, it now gets taxed. $1 gets taxed at the highest rate. And it becomes complicated. I don't want to complicate it too much that way, but that's about the only, for small landlords, that's about the only advantage that I've been able to identify myself as to why you would want to incorporate.
Okay, let's take ourselves out of that rabbit hole.
Sure.
That question is asked so much on social media.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the capital gains.
Mm-hmm.
So $250,000, they've taken this away. How is that going to affect us as rental property owners and housing in general for our supply and demand, in your opinion?
Small time owners like you, me, that have like for me, I personally own small single family homes. I don't think it's going to affect me at all, if any. But for some,
unless you decide to sell the whole lot.
Unless I decide to sell the whole lot at the moment, because each of my houses currently right now, it might be different in 10 years. I might be looking at more than $250,000 gains if this law still exists.
They might be worth $75,000.
They could do that. Another party might get in and just negate this, and it's happened before. The last time they raised the inclusion rates back in the 80s, 90s, in my opinion, it was a contributing factor to a very severe recession. Anybody who remembers the late 80s, early 90s?
14, 15% interest rates.
Yeah.
20% interest rates. I mean,
yeah. Well, that was the beginning of the 80s, but we experienced from 92 to 95, we experienced a very severe recession in Canada. A lot of that was because of the introduction of GST, which again, we can point out the fact that interest on the federal debt has gone up. Was back in 2020 was about $20 billion a year was what they were paying in interest in the federal debt. According to the latest budget, it's $54.1 billion. Not too many people know that the projection for GST revenues is $54 billion. So what they're bringing in GST tax charges is just paying the interest on the debt. And now they've added another $40 billion to debt. The thing with the debt is that a lot of it is still at low rates. But every year, a portion of it renews, and they don't pay it off. They're barely paying the interest. So the debt, as it matures, gets refinanced at current rates, 5%. So every year, that amount of interest is going to increase as long as interest rates stay where they are or go higher. If they go higher, that interest amount is going to go up even more. It's projected that amount of interest is going to be pushing $100 billion in 5 to 10 years. They're not even transferring $54 billion to the provinces for healthcare. It's actually only $52 billion. So think what we could be doing with that money if we weren't paying interest. But a little known fact that people don't realize is that the government of the day, when they brought GST in, it was intended that everything that they made off of GST was to go to pay the debt off.
I remember.
And now it's barely paying the interest on the debt. We should be upset.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
So getting back to the capital gains increase. I don't think it's going to have an effect on small guys like me. The bigger people, the rich, because they're saying, well, it's the fairness. We want the tax fairness. The rich should be paying their share. The problem is the ultra rich. They have techniques and potentials and options available to them that they can avoid paying it. Trusts and estate freezes, if anybody knows about it, can defer the essential sale of the asset to the next generation. So the ultra rich on this, and people who have estate freezes in place, there might be some in your audience that have estate freezes in place, it's not going to affect them, because in a sense, they're not selling when they die, because when you die, it's deemed that all your assets are sold. And when they're passed to the next generation, there are techniques in place, tax avoidance, perfectly legal, that are in place that you can defer any tax implication to the end of life of the next generation that inherits it. So they could be they're wanting money now, and it's potential the people that they're targeting aren't going to pay it for another 75 years, possibly 100 years. So that's what I was saying when we started is that I don't think that these measures are going to achieve what it is they want. The people that are going to be hurt by this, people are going to be looking at it and going like, okay, do I want to invest in something where I might have to pay 30% more tax on my windfall when I sell it, or my profit on when I sell it? Do I want to invest here? Or do I want to go somewhere else, i.e. internationally, and invest there where I'm going to where my money's going to be treated a little nicer? And if that's the case, which I suspect there will be some, we're going to get less investment in Canada. And that's one of the contributing factors to the recession that we had back in the 90s. We know that. It was attributable to the change because in the late 80s, early 90s, they changed the inclusion rate. And it bumped it all the way up to 75. I won't say which party was in power when they did it, but it's very familiar to everybody. The thing is, though, is they increased it to 75%, and we experienced a recession shortly after. The only thing is, though, is you probably won't see the effects of that recession for another 2 years, or possibly longer, long after the next election is going to happen. I know we don't want to get too political about this, but again, I don't think any of these measures are going to achieve what it is they want. They're projecting that they're going to be getting, I think the number is 6.9 billion from this increase in the capital gains inclusion rate. I think what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to say, I'm not going to sell right now. The rich people who this is targeted for have already figured out a way that they're going to avoid paying that for a considerable time. So I don't think we're going to see the 6.9 billion. I don't even think we're going to see half of it materialize.
Well, that's a great place to stop. It's fascinating how many rabbit holes you can go down. You kind of already answered it, but I'm supposed to ask the question because it's my podcast at the end. So I'm going to re-ask it anyways. You can answer it the same answer. But, Dan, this is the Investing to Win podcast. How do you define success, and what does winning look like for you?
Well, I said it, and I'll say it again, is getting up in the morning and being eager to go to work, wanting to go to work. I do, don't get me wrong. I can be a workaholic sometime, and I do like spending time with my family. But for me, the idea of success is I go to work because I want to go to work. I enjoy it. I have fun. To me, it's a game. Just and money is the way of keeping score. But yeah, no, if you find, the old proverb, if you find a job that you love doing, it's not a job. It's a game. It's fun. And so that's,
you're one of the few who can say that. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm willing to pass along my knowledge to anybody who wants to try and mimic what I've done.
Okay, well, we'll put your contact info
Mhm.
in the show notes. Those who are local to Winnipeg know who you are.
Mhm.
I wanted to thank you on behalf of the audience and our community in Winnipeg, because you always are willing to lend a hand, especially in advice. And thanks for coming by the studio today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.